The HOA president was halfway through cutting a blue ribbon when 3 sheriff SUVs came flying down the gravel road toward the marina. I'm not exaggerating. 1 second, there was country music playing over expensive speakers and people clapping with champagne glasses in their hands. The next second, deputies were stepping out with official folders and yellow closure tape. You could actually hear the music stop. That's how quiet it got. Linda Keller froze mid-smile with those giant silver scissors still in her hand, while 200 people turned to stare at the shoreline like something out of a movie was happening right in front of them. And honestly, it kind of was. What is the meaning of this? Linda snapped, marching down the dock in white designer heels like she owned the entire lake. One deputy didn't even blink. He just held up a red notice and said, "Ma'am, this marina is being shut down immediately pending investigation into unlawful construction on private property." You ever see a person go pale while trying to smile at the same time? That was Linda Keller right there. But here's the thing. She still thought this was some kind of misunderstanding. Big mistake. Because standing 50 feet away near the old bait shack was me, Cole Bennett, drinking coffee from a scratched-up green thermos like I was watching a fishing tournament instead of a $2 million disaster unfold. I didn't yell, didn't threaten anybody, didn't even move. That's what really started making people nervous. One of the deputies looked over at me and asked, "Mr. Bennett, do you want us to clear the docks now?" The entire crowd turned toward me at once. You could literally feel the confusion moving through the marina. Linda looked at me like she'd just realized the quiet old guy she'd been mocking for 6 months might not be who she thought he was. "This is HOA property," she barked. "We have permits." The deputy slowly shook his head. "No, ma'am. You have paperwork. That's not the same thing. Man, if you've ever dealt with somebody who thought acting confident was the same thing as being right, you already know where this story is headed. And trust me, what happened next only got crazier. A deputy started wrapping yellow tape around the fuel dock, while another officer blocked people from boarding the pontoon boats Linda had rented for the grand opening party. Half the residents looked embarrassed. The other half looked terrified because they'd already paid membership fees for slips in this marina. One older guy in a fishing hat muttered, "I knew something about this felt off." Yeah, turns out building a luxury marina on somebody else's private lake will do that. Linda tried one last time to take control. She marched right up to me with that tight fake smile people use when they're seconds away from losing their minds. "Cole," she hissed quietly, "you're making a very big mistake." I took a sip of coffee and looked past her toward the giant wooden sign hanging over the entrance that read Keller Cove Marina Grand Opening. Funny thing was, 6 months earlier, that exact spot had been part of my father's fishing shoreline. Bass boats used to sit there. My dad taught me how to cast from that dock when I was 8 years old. Now there were catered shrimp trays and HOA golf carts parked where we used to clean catfish. Funny how fast people try to claim something once they think money can be made from it. I looked back at Linda and said the one sentence that finally made her stop talking. "You should have checked the original lake deed before pouring concrete into my water." Dead silence. One deputy actually coughed, trying not to laugh. Linda's face twitched like her brain was trying to catch up to what I'd just said. Because what she still didn't understand in that moment was the biggest thing of all. She thought she built a marina beside my property. She didn't. She built the entire thing on it. And the craziest part? I warned her not to do it. More than once. But people like Linda Keller never think the quiet guy by the lake knows something they don't. That was her first mistake. Let me back up. My father used to say that people tell you exactly who they are the second they touch land that does not belong to them. Took me 61 years to realize he was right. See, this lake was never just water to my family. Lake Bennett sat about 40 miles outside Tyler, Texas, hidden behind pine trees and old county roads most tourists never noticed. My grandfather bought the land in 1948 after coming home from World War II with nothing except a tackle box, a truck that barely ran, and a dream of owning something nobody could take away from him. Back then, the lake was little more than a flooded quarry with muddy banks and mosquitoes big enough to carry off a small dog. But Grandpa saw something different. He spent 15 years clearing brush, reinforcing the shoreline, and building docks by hand. Every board on that old fishing pier had a story behind it. My dad added the bait shack in the 70s. I rebuilt the roof myself after a storm tore half of it off back in 2009. That lake raised 3 generations of Bennetts. Some of my earliest memories are out there. Sunrise over the water. Cold air hitting your face at 5 in the morning. Coffee bubbling on an old propane stove while my dad untangled fishing line with hands rough as sandpaper. We were not rich people. We were lake people. There is a difference. I worked 35 years as a civil engineer building bridges and flood systems across East Texas. Long hours. Muddy boots. A lot of paperwork nobody notices unless something collapses. But every Friday night, no matter where I was working, I drove back to that lake. Did not matter if gas prices were high or if I was tired enough to fall asleep standing up. That water was home. After my wife Diane passed away 6 years ago, the lake became the only place quiet enough for me to think straight again. Grief does strange things to a man. Some people drink. Some people move away. Me? I rebuilt an old aluminum fishing boat and spent mornings chasing bass under the fog. That lake probably saved my life more than once. Which is why seeing what happened to it made my stomach turn. Things started changing 2 years before the Marina disaster. First came the developers, then the bulldozers. Then entire forests disappeared almost overnight. You ever notice how every luxury subdivision looks exactly the same now? Beige houses, stone mailboxes, tiny decorative trees struggling to survive in front yards that all smell like fresh fertilizer. They called it Cedar Ridge Estates. Gated community, 300 homes, golf carts everywhere. The kind of place where people wave at you while secretly measuring your property value in their heads. At first, I stayed out of it. Their land was north of the lake. Mine wrapped around the eastern shoreline and part of the water itself. We had fences, surveys, deeds going back 70 years. Simple enough. Or at least I thought so. Then Linda Keller moved in from Dallas. Now let me paint this picture correctly because people like Linda always arrive the same way. White Range Rover. Big sunglasses. Perfect teeth. The kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. She was 58 years old and somehow acted like president of the neighborhood 5 minutes after unpacking her dishes. Within 6 months, she had become head of the HOA. Within 8 months, she started talking about transforming the lake into what she called a premium waterfront lifestyle destination. That should have been my warning sign right there. One Saturday morning, I was replacing boards on my dock when I heard golf carts coming down the shoreline trail. 4 of them. Linda was leading the group wearing white pants and carrying one of those stainless steel tumblers people always bring to meetings they think are important. Behind her were 2 contractors and some HOA board members taking notes. They walked straight onto my dock without asking. Not kidding. One contractor actually started measuring the shoreline while another pointed toward my bait shack. I climbed up slowly and said, "Can I help you folks with something?" Linda smiled like we were already friends. "Oh good, you are here. We are reviewing future marina placement options." I honestly thought she was joking at first. Future what? She tapped a folder against her leg and pointed out toward the water. The HOA board voted unanimously to modernize the lake experience for the community. Community. Funny word considering my family owned the shoreline she was standing on. One of the contractors asked her, "Will this dock need to come out?" Linda looked right at me and said, "Eventually, yes." That was the moment I realized these people were not confused. They genuinely believed this lake belonged to them now. And the strangest part? Linda never even asked who owned the water before she started making plans for it. Now, most people would have started yelling right there. I did not. See, when you spend 35 years dealing with contractors, county inspectors, and flood control paperwork, you learn something important real fast. The loudest person in the room is usually the one hiding weak paperwork. So instead of arguing, I climbed down from the dock, grabbed my tape measure, and kept replacing boards while Linda kept talking like she was already mayor of the lake. "The marina will increase property values dramatically," she said while one of the HOA guys nodded like a bobblehead in a truck window. "Boat slips, a fuel station, a small waterfront cafe. Very tasteful." Tasteful. That word almost made me laugh. My father's old fishing cove was apparently one espresso machine away from becoming a luxury resort. I finally looked up and said, "Linda, this shoreline is private property." She smiled again. Not nervous. Not confused. Confident. "Actually," she said, tapping her folder, "our legal team reviewed updated county zoning maps." There it was. Updated maps. Those 2 words started setting off alarms in my head immediately. Because zoning maps and ownership records are not the same thing. A lot of people do not understand that. Just because a county changes how land is labeled does not magically transfer ownership. But Linda talked like she thought the government had handed her the lake keys personally. One contractor asked me, "Sir, are you refusing shoreline access?" I said, "Depends. Are you asking permission or pretending you already have it?" That got real quiet for a second. Linda stepped between us fast. "Nobody wants conflict here, Cole. We are simply improving the community." Funny how people always say community right before they try taking something. Then she handed me a packet. Official HOA letterhead. Fancy gold logo. Inside was a proposal offering to purchase part of my shoreline access for what she called a fair community development rate. I almost choked when I saw the number. They were offering me $110,000 for lakefront property worth at least 10 times that. And here is where things got interesting. At the very bottom of the proposal was a sentence that changed everything. Pending final approval of Marina construction permits, already in process. Already in process. These people had started permit applications before even talking to me. That is when I knew this was never a negotiation. They had already decided the Marina was happening. I folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "Do not build anything on my shoreline," I told her calmly. "I am serious about that." Linda crossed her arms. "Cole, progress does not stop because one resident is emotional about old docks." One resident. Lady, my family owned half the water she was standing next to. But I stayed calm. That bothered her more than yelling would have. You could tell. People like Linda expect emotional reactions because emotional people make mistakes. Calm people scare them. Over the next few weeks, things escalated fast. First came the orange survey flags along my shoreline. Then temporary stakes appeared near the old boat ramp. One morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery echoing across the water before sunrise. I stepped outside with my coffee and nearly dropped the mug. Two excavators were parked beside my eastern cove while workers unloaded lumber from flatbed trailers. I walked down there immediately. "Who authorized this?" I asked. A young foreman checked his clipboard. "Cedar Ridge HOA Development Project." That does not answer my question. He shrugged. "We got county approval, sir." County approval. There it was again. Everybody hiding behind paperwork they barely understood. I told him directly, "You are standing on private property." The foreman looked uncomfortable for about half a second before pointing toward a black SUV parked near the trees. Linda stepped out wearing a bright white jacket like she was arriving for a television interview instead of trespassing before breakfast. "Good morning, Cole," she called cheerfully. "Beautiful day for progress." I remember staring at the shoreline. Behind her, my dad's old fishing reeds were already torn out. Muddy tire tracks cut across the bank where turtles used to nest every spring. The smell of diesel fuel mixed with lake water made me sick to my stomach. Linda walked over holding a travel coffee cup like we were old friends. "Construction crews will stay mostly on the eastern side," she explained. "Minimal disruption." "You are building on my land," I said. "No," she replied smoothly. "We are building on HOA waterfront access." That sentence right there told me everything. Linda did not think she was stealing the lake. She genuinely believed she already owned it. And honestly, that was what made her dangerous. The first dock platform went into the water 3 weeks later. That was the moment the whole thing stopped feeling like a misunderstanding and started feeling like an invasion. I remember waking up before sunrise to the sound of metal banging across the lake. At first I thought somebody had dropped an anchor. Then came the engines. Deep diesel noise rolling across the water where mornings used to be quiet enough to hear fish jumping near the reeds. I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee and saw floodlights glowing through the fog. Construction crews were already working. 6 in the morning on a Saturday. Huge floating dock sections sat tied near my shoreline, while workers shouted measurements back and forth like they were building an airport runway instead of a marina. And there, parked near my bait shack, sat Linda's white Range Rover like a flag planted in conquered territory. I walked down the shoreline slowly, boots crunching across gravel my father spread with his own hands 40 years earlier. One worker was hammering metal support posts directly into the shallow water near the old fishing cove. Another crew had stacked treated lumber beside my dock, without even covering it. Sawdust floated across the surface of the lake like pollen. "You need to stop," I said calmly. The younger workers looked uncomfortable immediately. One guy actually lowered his nail gun and stepped back. But before anybody answered, Linda appeared carrying a clipboard and wearing sunglasses even though the sun was barely up. "Good morning, Cole," she said. "We are making excellent progress." Progress. That woman could turn any bad idea into a marketing slogan. I pointed toward the floating dock sections. "You are building in protected shoreline water." "No," she corrected me instantly. "We are improving underutilized waterfront access." I swear people like Linda think changing the words changes reality. One of the workers quietly asked her, "Ma'am, are we good legally here?" Linda smiled without hesitation. "Absolutely. The HOA attorneys reviewed everything." That sentence kept coming up over and over again. The HOA attorneys reviewed everything. Funny thing about attorneys, though, they only know what clients tell them. And Linda Keller was leaving out one very important detail. She never showed anybody the original Bennett Lake deed. By noon, things got even worse. Dump trucks started arriving with gravel and concrete barriers. They cut directly through a section of shoreline grass where my wife Diane used to sit with a folding chair and read books during the summer. Sounds silly maybe, but grief attaches itself to places. Every inch of that shoreline carried memories for me. Watching strangers stomp across it with muddy boots felt wrong in a way I cannot fully explain unless you have lost somebody too. Around lunchtime I noticed another problem. The workers had torn out several old cedar posts near the eastern bank. Those posts marked part of the original property line. Not decorative, legal markers. My grandfather installed them decades earlier after a county survey. I walked over immediately. "Who told you to remove those?" A foreman wiped sweat off his forehead and pointed toward Linda again. Of course he did. Linda walked over holding an iced coffee like she was supervising landscaping at a country club. "Those old posts were creating confusion," she explained casually. "We are installing updated HOA shoreline markers next week." HOA shoreline markers. On my lake. That sentence nearly broke my calm for the first time. Nearly, but not quite. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every removed marker. Every machine. Every stack of material. Sitting on my shoreline. Linda noticed immediately. "Documenting things?" she asked with a little smirk. "Always," I replied. Something shifted in her expression for about half a second right there. Tiny, but I saw it. Most people panic when pushed. I got quieter. That bothered her. The marina construction became the talk of the county within a month. Local Facebook pages filled with drone footage and HOA promotional videos. Luxury lake living comes to Cedar Ridge. Modern waterfront access. Private slips now available. They were selling memberships before the marina even finished construction. $5,000 deposits. Some people paid more than 20 grand for premium boat storage. And here's where things started getting ugly for everybody involved. Longtime lake residents hated it. Older fishermen complained the constant construction noise was scaring fish away. One retired couple told me jet ski rentals were already being discussed for summer tourists. Tourists. On a lake that never even had public boat ramps before. But Linda kept pushing harder. Bigger docks. More lights. Fuel pumps. Security gates. Every week another piece of the shoreline disappeared under concrete or steel. Then one evening, I came home from Tyler after picking up groceries and almost drove straight into a massive sign planted beside the entrance road. Keller Cove Marina. Grand opening coming soon. Gold lettering. Huge floodlights. Decorative stone base. And the craziest part? That giant sign was sitting exactly where my grandfather's old wooden fishing bench used to be before the construction crews hauled it away like trash. I sat there in my truck staring at it for a long time. Then I noticed something else. At the bottom of the sign, in tiny letters, was the phrase community-owned waterfront. That was the moment I finally realized Linda was not just building a marina. She was trying to rewrite ownership itself. Once that sign went up, everything around the lake changed. Before the marina project, Lake Bennett was quiet. Retired folks fished at sunrise. Kids caught bluegill off docks in the summer. You could hear frogs at night instead of generators. Now, every weekend, looked like a real estate convention crashed into a boat dealership. Black SUVs lined the roads. Contractors carried blueprints around like they were building a casino. People I had never seen before started walking the shoreline talking about investment opportunities. One afternoon, I stopped at Miller's feed store in town, and even old Frank Miller shook his head when I walked in. "Cole," he said quietly, "you better get ahead of this thing." Frank had known my family 40 years. If he looked worried, there was a reason. "What have you heard?" I asked. Frank leaned across the counter. Developers from Dallas are buying lots around the lake. Fast. They are telling people the marina is going to turn this whole area into the next luxury waterfront community. Luxury waterfront community. Funny phrase considering half those people had never baited a hook in their lives. But what bothered me most was not the money. It was what came with it. Noise. Traffic. Crowds. Strangers. The entire personality of the lake was changing, and Linda Keller loved every second of it. A week later, she held an HOA town hall meeting at the Cedar Ridge Clubhouse. I only went because several older residents asked me to. They were nervous. Some of them had lived around that lake almost as long as my family had. The clubhouse looked like something out of a resort brochure. Big stone fireplace. Chandeliers. Free bottled water lined up on tables. Linda stood at the front wearing a cream-colored blazer beside giant poster boards showing computer renderings of the finished marina. Boat slips. Floating restaurants. Decorative lighting. Even fireworks displays over the lake for summer events. Fireworks. Over a drought-sensitive East Texas lake surrounded by pine trees. Smart. Real smart. This project represents the future of Cedar Ridge, Linda announced while people clapped. Increased property values, tourism opportunities, community growth. Then she pointed to a rendering showing luxury pontoons lined up beside the fuel dock. We are already receiving interest from regional boating groups. That sentence made several older residents exchange nervous looks immediately. One man stood up near the back. Retired firefighter named Walter Green. Good man. Quiet guy. Linda, he asked carefully, is this lake even zoned for commercial marina activity? Her smile tightened for half a second. Our legal team has reviewed all zoning requirements. There it was again. The magic legal team. Walter tried again. No disrespect, but who owns the water rights? Linda answered too quickly. The community has protected shoreline access. Protected shoreline access. Notice how she never actually said ownership? That was not an accident. I stayed quiet in the back of the room, watching her carefully. Then came the moment that really changed everything. Linda clicked to the next presentation slide, and a map appeared on the projector screen. My stomach dropped immediately. The map showed nearly the entire eastern shoreline labeled as Future Cedar Ridge Waterfront Expansion Zone. My shoreline. My dock. My bait shack. Even part of the cove where my father's ashes were scattered after he passed away. Somebody beside me whispered, "Holy hell." Yeah, exactly. Linda kept talking like nothing was wrong. Future phases may include expanded recreational access, private rental cabins, and seasonal lake events. Rental cabins. Seasonal events. She was not building a marina anymore. She was building an entire business operation around my lake. And suddenly, all the pieces started fitting together in my head. The oversized docks. The fuel pumps. The investors from Dallas. The rush to get construction finished. This was never about helping residents enjoy the water. This was about turning private property into commercial money. After the meeting, several residents quietly approached me in the parking lot. One older woman, named Patricia, looked genuinely upset. "Cole," she said softly, "I did not know they were building all that on your side of the lake." "Most people do not," I replied. Another resident shook his head. Linda told everybody the county transferred access rights during the rezoning process. There it was. The lie. Clean. Simple. Dangerous. She had convinced half the community that zoning updates somehow changed ownership. That is not how property law works. Not even close. But most regular people do not spend their lives reading deeds and engineering records. They hear official words like rezoning and permits and assume somebody checked everything properly. That assumption was exactly what Linda was counting on. Driving home that night, I noticed new construction lights glowing across the shoreline. The marina was getting bigger by the day. Massive steel pilings stood out of the water like skeletons. Workers were installing electrical hookups for future boat slips. And near the fuel dock sat two shiny new gas pumps still wrapped in plastic. I pulled my truck over near the old boat ramp and just sat there listening to generators hum across the water. Then something caught my eye. A temporary sign attached to the marina fence. Future home of Keller Cove Yacht Club. Yacht Club. On a lake where most folks still use 20-year-old aluminum fishing boats. I actually laughed out loud sitting there alone in the dark. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. Then I noticed another truck parked beside the marina construction gate. County Permit Office. A man in a reflective vest climbed out holding inspection folders while Linda greeted him with a smile and a handshake. They talked for several minutes beside the shoreline while workers kept building behind them. And that was the exact moment I realized something else. Linda Keller was not bluffing anymore. Somehow, she had convinced county officials this marina belonged there, which meant either somebody had not done their homework or somebody was deliberately ignoring the truth. The next morning, I drove straight to the Smith County Courthouse. Not because I was panicking. Honestly, by that point I was past panic. I was irritated. There is a difference. Panic makes you emotional. Irritation makes you focused. And after 35 years working around engineers, contractors, and county records, I had learned one thing better than anything else. When people start acting too confident around land deals, you go find the original paperwork. Not the new paperwork. The old paperwork. The courthouse basement smelled exactly the same as it did 20 years earlier. Dust, old, paper, cheap coffee, government air conditioning that somehow makes every room feel like 1987. The clerk at the records desk looked up when I walked in and smiled immediately. "Cole Bennett," she said. "Haven't seen you in a while." Her name was Martha Ruiz. Been working county records longer than some lawyers practicing in town. Smart woman too. "Martha," I said, "I need every original property document tied to Lake Bennett." She raised an eyebrow. "That marina mess? News travels fast in East Texas." I nodded once. Martha sighed. "Honey, half this county is talking about it." Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. Something about those permits felt off to me. That got my attention immediately. She disappeared into the archive room while I sat down beside an old metal fan, making noises like it was losing a fight with gravity. About 20 minutes later, Martha returned pushing a cart stacked with dusty county binders, rolled surveys, and deed records tied together with faded red string. "Start with these," she said. Original shoreline filings from the 1940s. And that was where the whole thing started falling apart for Linda Keller. Most people think ownership records are simple. They are not, especially around lakes. Water rights, shoreline easements, flood control agreements, access roads, utility permits, mineral rights. One property can have 50 different legal layers tied to it over decades. That is why experienced developers usually hire teams of surveyors before touching waterfront land. Linda apparently skipped that step, or thought nobody would notice. About an hour into the record search, I found the first problem. The Eastern Shoreline Zoning Update Cedar Ridge kept referencing. It only changed recreational land classification. It did not transfer ownership. Not even close. That alone should have stopped construction immediately. But then I found something even bigger. A folded survey map from 1948 stamped with Smith County engineering approval. I carefully spread it across the table and just stared at it for a full minute. There it was in black ink. Bennett family lake boundary and water control easement. My grandfather had not just bought shoreline property. He purchased part of the actual lake bed itself along with protected water access rights extending nearly 120 feet into the eastern cove, including the exact location where Linda built the Marina fuel dock. I actually laughed sitting there alone at the table. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Those idiots really had poured concrete directly into protected private water access. Then Martha walked over holding another binder. "You might want to see this too," she said. Inside was a copy of the Marina permit application submitted by Cedar Ridge HOA. I started flipping through it slowly. Site plans, environmental forms, shoreline modification requests. Then I reached the ownership verification page. My stomach tightened instantly. Somebody had attached a simplified county zoning image instead of the original deed survey. Not a mistake. A replacement. A very intentional replacement. And the signature approving shoreline authorization? It was not mine. Not even close. I stared at it for several seconds before looking back up at Martha. "Who approved this?" Martha adjusted her glasses. "County Development Office signed off 2 months ago. Based on this." She nodded slowly. "Looks that way." Here is the scary part about government offices. Most employees are overworked. They process stacks of permits every week. If paperwork looks official enough, things slip through, especially when developers pressure timelines. But this was different. Somebody deliberately avoided the original ownership survey because the original survey would have killed the entire marina project immediately. I kept digging, and every new document made things worse for Cedar Ridge. Environmental impact forms listed the shoreline as community-controlled waterfront. False. Fuel storage permits referenced public recreational access zones that did not legally exist. Then came the biggest discovery of all. Buried in an old engineering folder tied to my father's flood maintenance records was a state water management agreement from 1973. The lake was classified under protected runoff control guidelines because of seasonal East Texas flooding patterns. That meant any major commercial marina construction required additional state review before approval. Additional review Linda never completed. I leaned back in my chair staring at the ceiling fan turning overhead while all the pieces finally locked together in my head. Linda had rushed construction because she knew delays meant scrutiny. The faster the marina became operational, the harder it would be politically to shut it down later. She was gambling that nobody around the lake understood property law well enough to challenge her. Wrong homeowner. Around closing time, Martha walked over holding a photocopy packet nearly 3 inches thick. "Cole," she said carefully, "if half this paperwork is wrong, somebody at Cedar Ridge is in serious trouble." I looked down at the stack in my hands. Original deeds, surveys, easements, water control agreements, permit inconsistencies. Everything. Documentation beats intimidation. Every single time. And sitting there in that dusty courthouse basement, I finally understood why Linda Keller always acted so confident. She thought nobody would ever go looking for the original papers. Most people think the smart move after finding evidence like that is to storm into a lawyer's office and file a lawsuit immediately. That sounds good in movies. Real life works differently. See, lawsuits take time. And time was exactly what Linda Keller was gambling on. She wanted that marina open fast because once hundreds of people started using it, shutting it down would become politically messy. Angry homeowners, investors, businesses, tourism money. She thought momentum would protect her. Funny thing is, I realized momentum could destroy her too. So I did something that drove Linda absolutely crazy. I stayed quiet. No threats. No dramatic confrontation. No social media war. Nothing. I just kept documenting everything while the marina got bigger and bigger. Every morning, I photographed construction progress from the same spot near my dock. Dates, times, equipment, fuel installation, shoreline modifications. Every permit number posted near the gate. Old engineering habits die hard. Meanwhile, Linda acted like she had already won. She started giving interviews to local papers about modernizing lake access. The county tourism board even shared one of her promotional videos online. Drone footage swept across my lake while upbeat country music played in the background. My lake. I still could not get over that part. But then things started getting sloppy. Really sloppy. One afternoon, I noticed contractors unloading commercial fuel tanks beside the dock. Large ones. Bigger than what private boat owners normally use. That immediately raised another red flag because East Texas lakes have strict environmental rules around shoreline fuel storage, especially near protected runoff zones. I drove into Tyler the next morning and visited an old friend named Ray Holloway, retired game warden, smartest outdoorsman I ever met. Ray looked through the marina photos while chewing sunflower seeds behind his desk at the bait shop where he worked part-time. "Cole," he said slowly, "did they file state environmental review for those pumps?" "Not that I can find." Ray leaned back in his chair. "Then somebody is playing with fire." He explained that commercial marina fuel systems near protected runoff water required additional inspections, spill prevention systems, and environmental approval. Missing even one part could trigger state enforcement, especially if the marina started operating publicly before final compliance review. That was the first time I started realizing how deep Linda's problem really was. This was no longer just about trespassing or bad surveys. She had potentially built a commercial operation on protected private water without full environmental clearance. Wrong lake. Wrong homeowner. Wrong paperwork. But the craziest part? Linda still kept pushing harder. 2 weeks later, invitations for the grand opening party started appearing all over town. Ribbon-cutting ceremony. Live music. Catered barbecue. Luxury boating showcase. They even hired a local television crew. Linda wanted cameras there. That told me everything. People trying to hide wrongdoing do not invite news reporters. People who think they are untouchable do. Around the same time, residents inside Cedar Ridge started getting nervous. Construction costs were exploding. HOA fees increased twice in 3 months. One older resident named Walter Green stopped by my dock one evening carrying a folded HOA newsletter. "Cole," he said quietly, "you need to look at this." The newsletter announced expanded waterfront investment opportunities, private membership sales, seasonal event packages, corporate retreat rentals. My stomach tightened reading it. Linda was not just building a marina anymore. She was turning the entire lake into a commercial business district using property she did not legally control. Then Walter pointed at one sentence near the bottom of the page. Projected annual marina revenue exceeding $2 million. There it was. The real reason behind everything. Money. Not community improvement. Not property values. Revenue. Suddenly the giant docks made sense. The fuel pumps. The yacht club signs. The rental plans. Linda was trying to create a full commercial waterfront operation before anybody realized the ownership foundation underneath it was rotten. That same week, I finally contacted the sheriff's office directly. Not emergency dispatch. Not complaints. I requested a quiet meeting with Deputy Aaron Mason, a guy I had known for years through county flood projects. Good deputy. Calm guy. We met at a small diner outside town, near Highway 64. I spread copies of the surveys and permits across the table between coffee cups and pie menus. Aaron read silently for nearly 10 minutes. Then he looked up slowly. "Cole," he said carefully, "this marina is sitting on your protected water easement?" According to the original records, yes. And they used zoning maps instead of ownership verification? Looks that way. Aaron rubbed his forehead. That is bad. How bad? He pointed toward the permit copies. If they knowingly submitted false shoreline authorization for commercial development, that becomes more than a civil dispute. That sentence hung in the air for a second. More than a civil dispute. Aaron was careful with his words after that. Deputies do not like getting dragged into property battles unless they have clear documentation. Makes sense. But before leaving, he gave me one warning I never forgot. "Do not interrupt construction yourself," he said firmly. "No arguments. No blocking equipment. Let them keep building." I looked at him for a second. "Why?" Aaron folded the permit copies neatly and slid them back across the table. "Because every extra dollar they pour into that marina increases the size of the problem they created for themselves." That right there was when I realized something important. Linda Keller thought she was racing toward victory. She was actually sprinting toward the edge of a cliff. Opening day arrived on a Saturday morning with clear skies and 72-degree weather. Perfect East Texas lake weather. The kind my father used to call fishing weather. Instead, the shoreline looked like a county fair mixed with a luxury car commercial. White tents lined the marina entrance. Catering trucks filled the parking lot. Country music blasted across the water loud enough to scare birds out of the trees. By 8 in the morning, golf carts were buzzing around like insects carrying HOA guests back and forth between the clubhouse and the marina docks. I parked my old Ford near the bait shack and sat there drinking coffee from my green thermos while watching people walk around taking selfies beside giant boats that cost more than most houses in Tyler. The whole thing felt unreal. 6 months earlier, that shoreline held fishing poles and cedar trees. Now there were champagne tables sitting where my father cleaned catfish. Linda Keller loved every second of it. You could tell. She floated around the marina, greeting people like she was opening Disneyland. White blazer. Gold jewelry. Big sunglasses. Local business owners shook her hand while a television crew filmed interviews beside the fuel dock. One reporter asked, "Linda, what does this project mean for Cedar Ridge?" She smiled straight into the camera. "This marina represents growth, opportunity, and community investment for the future of East Texas waterfront living." Waterfront living. Lady, it was a fishing lake with bass boats and old retirees drinking coffee at sunrise. But the crowd ate it up. Around 9 o'clock, I noticed something interesting. Several county officials arrived together near the marina gate. Building inspectors, permit office employees, even a tourism board representative. Linda greeted every single one personally. That told me she still believed she had political cover. She thought if enough important people attended the ribbon cutting, nobody would dare challenge the project publicly. That confidence was about to age very badly. By 10 o'clock, the marina was packed. Pontoon boats floated beside the slips with balloons tied to railings. New golf carts carried guests around while servers handed out barbecue plates and lemonade. Somebody even hired a local country singer to perform beside the waterfront cafe area that technically should never have existed in the first place. I stayed near the old bait shack, quietly watching everything unfold. A few longtime residents stopped to talk with me. Most looked nervous. Walter Green walked over holding a paper plate and whispered, "You sure you are okay letting this happen?" I took a sip of coffee. Not everything that gets built stays standing. Walter blinked twice at that, but did not ask more questions. Around 10:30, Linda climbed onto a small stage near the dock entrance holding oversized silver scissors while cameras rolled. "Welcome everyone," she announced proudly through the speakers. "Today we celebrate the beginning of a new chapter for Cedar Ridge and Lake Bennett." Hearing her call it Lake Bennett almost made me smile. Funny how she kept using my family name while pretending my family ownership did not exist. Then came the moment she made her biggest mistake. Linda raised one arm toward the water and said, "This lake finally belongs to the community." Wrong sentence. Very wrong sentence. Because less than 30 seconds later, every head in the marina turned toward the sound of tires crunching hard across gravel roads. 3 sheriff SUVs rolled down the hill toward the marina entrance, one behind another. Not fast enough to look reckless. Just fast enough that everybody immediately stopped talking. Country music kept playing for about 3 awkward seconds before somebody shut it off completely. Deputies stepped out wearing tan uniforms while another dark state vehicle pulled in behind them carrying environmental enforcement officers. That was when the mood changed instantly. Linda lowered the scissors slowly, still trying to smile. "What is this?" she asked loudly. Deputy Aaron Mason walked straight toward the stage carrying a red folder. Calm. Professional. No drama. Honestly, that made it hit harder. He handed Linda an official document while television cameras accidentally captured the entire thing live. "Ma'am," Aaron said clearly enough for half the crowd to hear. "This marina is being ordered closed pending investigation into unlawful commercial construction, shoreline violations, and unauthorized fuel installation on protected private property." Dead silence. Absolute dead silence. One woman near the front actually whispered, "Oh my God." Linda stared at the paperwork like it was written in another language. "There has to be some mistake," she snapped. Aaron shook his head once. "No ma'am. County records and state review confirmed the original ownership documents this morning." Then came the part one will never forget. Aaron turned slightly and looked toward me standing beside the bait shack. "Mr. Bennett," he called out calmly, "would you like the marina cleared immediately?" The entire crowd turned to stare at me all at once. Hundreds of people, investors, residents, news cameras, county officials, everybody suddenly realizing the quiet old engineer they ignored for months might actually own the water under their expensive boats. Linda looked at me with a face I had never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, fear, real fear. I walked forward slowly holding my thermos while deputies started placing yellow closure tape around the fuel dock. "You cannot do this," Linda hissed. "We have permits." I stopped right in front of her. "You had zoning paperwork," I said calmly. "That is not the same thing as ownership." One environmental officer walked past us carrying inspection forms while another started photographing the fuel systems. Guests began leaving quietly. Investors looked furious. Some HOA residents looked sick to their stomachs. And right there in the middle of all that, expensive chaos, Deputy Mason said the sentence that finally shattered Linda Keller completely. "The original Bennett Lake deed predates your HOA by 50 years. You could literally watch the color drain out of her face. Because in that moment she finally understood the truth. She had not built a marina beside my property. She built the entire thing directly on top of it. The marina stayed closed after that day. Not temporarily. Completely. Within 48 hours, county investigators started crawling all over the property with cameras, clipboards, and survey equipment. Every permit got reviewed again from the beginning. Every environmental filing. Every shoreline authorization form. Turns out when state investigators discover a commercial fuel system sitting on protected private water, they suddenly become very interested in paperwork accuracy. Funny how that works. Cedar Ridge residents were furious. Not at me either. At Linda. Especially after the truth finally started spreading through the neighborhood. A lot of homeowners honestly believed the HOA had legal ownership rights to the marina area. Linda told them that repeatedly during meetings. Some families had invested retirement money into premium boat slips. Others prepaid yearly memberships for amenities that legally could never operate in the first place. One retired couple from Dallas had paid nearly $80,000 for what they thought was guaranteed lakefront access. Imagine finding out your expensive waterfront investment was sitting on somebody else's property the entire time. Lawsuits started almost immediately. Not from me at first. From the residents. That was the part Linda never saw coming. People can forgive mistakes. They do not forgive being embarrassed publicly while losing money. Especially wealthy homeowners. Cedar Ridge HOA meetings turned into complete chaos after opening day. Neighbors demanded resignations. Financial records. Permit explanations. Some board members claimed they never saw the original ownership documents. Others blamed Linda directly for rushing construction approvals. One treasurer actually resigned in the middle of a meeting, according to Walter Green. Just stood up, placed his folder on the table, and walked out. Then the county froze further waterfront development permits around the entire lake pending review. That hit developers hard. Investors disappeared almost overnight. The fancy marketing videos vanished from social media within days. Funny how fast luxury dreams collapse once deputies start putting yellow tape around fuel pumps. As for Linda Keller, she stopped showing up around the marina completely. Her white Range Rover disappeared from the shoreline after opening day. People in town started whispering she hired attorneys from Dallas. Maybe true, maybe not. But no lawyer on earth can magically rewrite a 70-year-old deed once the original records come out. Documentation beats intimidation every time. About 3 weeks after the shutdown, Deputy Aaron Mason stopped by my dock while I was repairing fishing lights near the shoreline. "Thought you should know," he said, handing me a copy of the county enforcement summary. The report confirmed unauthorized shoreline construction, improper environmental filings, and permit approvals based on incomplete ownership verification. In simple English, somebody built a luxury marina without legally controlling the water underneath it. Aaron leaned against the dock railing looking out over the lake. "You handled this smarter than most people would have," he admitted. I shrugged. Anger makes expensive mistakes. He laughed at that because we both knew it was true. Plenty of folks would have screamed, threatened workers, blocked equipment, or done something emotional months earlier. That probably would have helped Linda paint herself as the victim. Instead, I let paperwork do the talking. Turns out paperwork has a funny way of making loud people very quiet. The marina itself eventually got dismantled piece by piece over the next several months. Fuel systems removed first, then floating dock sections, then lighting systems and fencing. Every week, another expensive piece disappeared from the shoreline until eventually the lake started looking like itself again. Quiet, calm, real. One morning near the end of summer, I walked down to the old Eastern Cove carrying my coffee thermos before sunrise. Mist drifted across the water exactly the way it used to when my father took me fishing as a kid. No generators, no construction noise, no golf carts buzzing around pretending a fishing lake needed a yacht club. Just water, wind, birds, peace. I sat on the rebuilt dock and watched sunlight slowly hit the trees while Bass jumped near the reeds workers once tore out. Nature has a way of recovering if people stop trying to turn everything into a business project. A few weeks later, Walter Green stopped by carrying 2 fishing poles and a small tackle box. "Mind if I fish here again?" he asked. "Thought this lake belonged to the community," I joked. Walter laughed so hard he nearly dropped the tackle box. "Not anymore," he said. "Truth is, it never did." And that was the whole lesson sitting underneath this entire mess. Just because somebody acts powerful does not mean they own what they are touching. Fancy signs do not beat deeds. HOA meetings do not override property law. And confidence means absolutely nothing when the original paperwork says otherwise. My father used to tell me something every time we repaired docks after storms. Water remembers who respects it. Took me a long time to understand what he meant. Standing there on that quiet shoreline watching sunrise hit Lake Bennett again, I finally got it. The lake was never angry about development. It just belonged to the wrong people for a little while. And eventually, the truth floated back to the surface.